Greetings, bones and ghouls. Welcome to Halloween in July 2022, Night of the Stalker. This year we've got some extra special rewards for all of you who take the plunge and take advantage of how yearly patron rates are slashed as low as they'll go. Anyone who pledges yearly not only gets their name on the patron apron, but will also get the inaugural Charlatan Wonder Iron-On patch. And if you pledge yearly at the $5 tier or higher, you'll get your very own extra special patron apron with your name embroidered onto it by yours truly. By the way, I'm making all these myself. There's no middleman for any of this because I'm just so DIY. And if yours kind of suck a little, that just means it's unique, rare, one of one, collector's item. Pledge now, pledge! S.T.A.L.K.E.R was formerly the worst thing to ever happen to S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Then the NFT thing came out, but they went back on that, and then the other thing happened, and I really hope the other thing is done by the time you are all watching this video. As you might have known if you clicked on this video, Games World GSC knocked it out of the park with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Shadow of Chernobyl, which beat Fallout 3 to the 3D open world wasteland experience by a whole year and showed a much more gritty side to adventuring out in the irradiated exclusion zone. But as some of you know already, the Shadow of Chernobyl we got and the one that was initially planned were very different due to various circumstances, and there's even an attempt to recreate the original version of the game in the form of a mod called Lost Alpha. Lost Alpha and the original versions of S.T.A.L.K.E.R are very ambitious. So ambitious that the game was arguably in development hell for a number of years because of it, and eventually their publisher told them to just start cutting out a crap ton of stuff to get the game out the door by the end of 2006, and they got it out in early 2007. But what about all that stuff they cut? Well, most if not all of it and then some are the Lost Alpha mods, plural because there's two versions, but GSC Game World was still feeling pretty ambitious. They heavily updated their X-ray engine, added in a crap ton of stuff to their next game, and then released a prequel to Shadow of Chernobyl, S.T.A.L.K.E.R Clear Sky. Clear Sky quite literally came out the year after Shadow of Chernobyl dropped, with a total of about 18 months between the two games if we're assuming that the second they released Shadow of Chernobyl, they just immediately got to work on Clear Sky, which I'm not sure if the case, but probably isn't. There was a lot of new stuff in Clear Sky, but it also had a lot of blatantly reused stuff, and also not all of that new stuff was very good. And in fact, most of it really sucks. It's horrible even. There's a reason why we don't see a lot of it in the third game, Call of Pripyat. I don't know how, but they managed to make parts of S.T.A.L.K.E.R even more tedious while you're actively doing less in-game, and thanks to a few pseudo-scripted segments, or actually a lot of pseudo-scripted segments, Clear Sky has a reputation for easily being the most frustrating of the three S.T.A.L.K.E.R games, but we'll talk about the military checkpoint in a second. Welcome back to the zone, stalkers. You're gonna see a lot of familiar stuff here. We start the game with some merc leading some scientist types through the swamp near the zone, and they're all like, oh, it's cool, we predict that there's gonna be a mission for a while, and then a mission immediately happens. Miraculously, you don't die. In fact, you wake up as if you were just sleeping off a bad hangover. I don't think that's gonna work on the non-scripted ones though, so be careful when you're out there. You're told by some dudes that you respond to the zone emissions in a weird way that actually helps you a bit. Although I never noticed any of those sort of buffs, so thanks for being a liar. And while this is pretty cool, you're gonna turn into a zombie sooner or later if this keeps up. So who are these dudes that picked you up anyway? They call themselves Clear Sky, and they say they're all about studying the zone and learning how to understand and even coexist with it. Which sounds almost exactly like the Ecologist, except these guys aren't affiliated with the government and they have guns. They talk about how great they are and all this cool stuff, but of course they're gonna need you to do literally anything because this is a video game. But don't worry, despite their name literally being on the title of this game, you don't see a whole lot of them outside of the initial swamp area at the start of the game and then at the very end. Like once you leave the swamp, you don't have to deal with Clear Sky until like the literal end game. By the way, welcome to the swamps, my dude. There are no sarcastic but lovable ogres here. Just pain. This is where you'll discover that suddenly S.T.A.L.K.E.R is acting a whole like a Call of Duty game, and by that I mean there's a lot of straightforward, linear shootouts and a whole lot of nade spam. Like an insane amount of nade spam that would be impressive with how well the AI coordinates it, if not for how absurdly frustrating it is. Because the AI never runs out of grenades. So if you fight up close, you're gonna be getting a poor man's artillery shelling about once every 30 seconds to a minute. You are now also fighting organized factions that will have an opinion of of you according to some random meters on your PDA. The faction system is a much more fleshed out version of the previous game where if you really want to, you can overtly join the factions or even piss them off to make you shoot on sight, so much so that they'll slam their doors in your face right before an mission, which is like a violation of the zone bro code. Factions like the Free Stalkers, Clear Sky, Duty, Freedom, and even the Bandits will call for your aid whenever any area they're holding comes under attack by other dudes that want their stuff. This is really annoying at first until you realize that in the right spots, you can use this to farm guns to sell off to the vendors who don't seem overly concerned that you're pawning off the rifles of their fallen comrades, because that's just how the zone is. There's an even better way to farm rifles that we'll talk about later on though, so stay tuned. So you're finally actually ready to get into the zone itself, since the swamps, while anomalous, are technically outside of the zone, and now you have to face it. That military checkpoint that everyone told you about. I did it and it was goddamned terrible. For the uninitiated, early on in the game, Call of Pripyat tasked you with entering the zone by sneaking past a military checkpoint. The problem is, once you get within a certain distance of it, it instantly sees you and opens fire with a mounted machine gun. Now, I came back later and discovered that no one is even manning this gun, so you can't really take out the gunner, and the thing has infinite ammo. Now, you can attempt to sneak past the machine gun fire, going from designated safe spot to designated safe spot, knowing that if your timing is off by a single half second, you will be vaporized in even less time, all while fighting off waves of soldiers who have much better gear than you do right now, because you started with a leather jacket, a hunting shotgun, and a lot of regrets. Oh, and by the way, you have to dance perfectly to the tune of these scripted sequences while they're doing all this. Or you can just take the other entrance to the cordon up north. I'm not kidding. There is essentially no reason not to just ignore the intended objective entirely. You get no penalties for just ignoring it. You just, as long as you get into the cordon, you are fine. The only thing that's so much as a speed bump for this is that for whatever reason, the stalkers holding the territory around like the bridge and stuff will initially be hostile towards you until you talk to Sid down at the base. So you're gonna have to go through a hell of a fight. Or, you know, you could actually just run past them and save yourself the trouble, because these guys are technically going to be like your allies in like 10 minutes anyway. This is going to be the theme for Clear Sky, by the way. A bunch of awful, pseudo-scripted to overtly scripted events that can be entirely circumvented by just trying to walk around them. However, in the end, they get wise to that and railroad you into some of the most egregious scripted events I've ever seen in a game like S.T.A.L.K.E.R. So, you're finally back in the zone. Ah, the memories. It all looks so familiar. In fact, the large majority of your time playing the game Clear Sky is going to take place in recycled and slightly remixed areas from Shadow of Chernobyl. Now, I know Call of Pripyat also recycled a couple maps, but they did it in a way where you wouldn't really notice if you weren't looking too closely. Here, it's obvious. This kind of makes some things easier for you, as you don't need to explore too hard, as you've already been here before. But there's something that's a huge bummer about replaying a slightly remixed version of an old map from a previous game when you were expecting a new sequence. Like, it's not Overwatch 2 levels of overtly similar, but it's pretty close. It's gonna be like things like, oh look, that fence that bisected the cordon zone, it doesn't have a hole in it anymore, so you've gotta walk all the way around the fence to the bridge checkpoint if you wanna get on the other side of the fence here. Which is ironic, because there is a bridge anomaly which teleports you right by another anomaly so you can pick up some artifacts, except you have to walk all the way back to where the bridge anomaly was, walk around the bridge, and then walk back. Because what is anything? We'll get some new levels later on though, but not a whole lot. It's essentially like one other area and then the end game is in a new area. Part 2. The middle part. Now that we're in the middle of the game, we can talk about all the new stuff and how most of it really sucks. If I had to guess the theme for all the stuff they wanted to add in between the faction war, balance tweaks, AI stuff, where they're just throwing every possible idea they could get functioning into the game with little regard for how it affects the feel of the game or if it was even a good idea to add it in the first place. Remember that originally Games World GSC wanted stuff like cars in-game and an absurdly large map that would make it very needy to have those cars, but it just wasn't working. Here it feels like after they tuned up the X-Ray engine, they just wanted to cram as much stuff as possible into it, and it's not exactly hard to figure out why the few things that rolled over from Clear Sky to Call of Pripyat were heavily modified from the last time we saw them. I think one of the things that we should go over is a minor balance change that will have a big effect on you to your early and mid-game experience. Strelok bled like any other man who got shot in the zone, but despite having apparently enhanced abilities from the emissions, Mercenary Scar, the person you play as, is a hemophiliac. No matter what armor you're wearing, no matter what caliber of bullet just hit you, and no matter where it hit you, taking almost any and all damage will cause you to start bleeding, and bleeding stacks real fast in Clear Sky. This wouldn't be such a big deal if it wasn't for the fact that most of the game you're not really going to be making all that much cash, and the 200 Russo bucks a bandage cost, where you'll need several bandages just to stop bleeding from a rifle round, is gonna make you broke a lot of the time in the early game. This will also make you prioritize certain artifacts once you're finally in a spot to start carrying them around, because sure, they're worth a lot of money, and that can afford a lot of fixes and major upgrades to your gear, but the amount of money you will save by not needing to buy every bandage in every vendor ever in an area will add up to several rare artifacts worth of cash over the course of a couple hours. Speaking of pain, let's expand on that nade spam some more. All humanoid creatures will throw grenades at you, and Clear Sky not so subtly helps the AI with their throws. Grenades will almost always land right at your feet unless you move out of the throwing range as soon as they start telegraphing that they're going to throw a grenade. Also, I do not know if this is for absolutely certain, but AI grenade throws seem to be on a set timer based on when you first engage them, and if you engage 4 dudes at the same time and you're within nading distance, they'll all throw at the same time and you will get insta-killed if you're in what I call the anti-Goldilocks zone, which is just within their throwing range but also so far out that by the time the grenades land, there's no escaping them because they just go right off. I wouldn't be so butt mad about this if it wasn't for the fact that their grenades are magnetic to me and seem to ignore tree branches and stuff, whereas the player's grenades have to follow the rule of physics for some reason, and enemies will just ignore them unless it's a direct hit because of how damage multipliers work. In case you didn't know, the damage multiplier in Clear Sky can be summarized as if it's a headshot, it does a crap ton of damage. Anywhere else does essentially nothing, at least for the enemies anyway. Like, you can mag dump guys at point blank range and they'll still be standing. Unfortunately, it seems that nades rarely count as headshots unless you're real creative with them, but at least when you're throwing them. Like, it seems that you don't get the headshot special exemption when the grenades are being thrown at you. Now, how about we pick at the faction system for a bit because they made such a big fuss about it. Factions take the fun out of fights. One of the big reasons why I didn't join one throughout the game was because the times when you're fighting alongside a faction or a friendly squad in the story are some of the dullest fights in any Stalker game, period. Fighting with a squad of dudes will usually have you being a spectator in said fight, save for occasionally popping off a guy off in the distance or a scripted sniper that only you can take out, or having to scramble to avoid the nade spam when you try to help push. Fights with an AI faction are so dull that Games World GSE likely had some level of awareness about this problem, because in the endgame, the default faction, Clear Sky, which you are always aligned with no matter what, for some reason, literally just sits around and does nothing way off to the side when you hit a certain point in the endgame in order to make the endgame fights more interesting. I'm not exaggerating here when I say that the secret faction of super cool dudes decide they're all gonna take a smoke break in the middle of their big push into Limansk because gameplay balance. Lastly, on the bad things that got it added in are emissions. What are you talking about, Charl? Emissions are the best part about S.T.A.L.K.E.R, I hear you say. Well, in case your memory's a little rusty, while the open world emissions were implemented in Clear Sky, they were really rough. They lasted much longer than the ones in Call of Pripyat, but were also much more ambiguous with when they were coming on. They didn't build up like they did later on in Call of Pripyat, so it was hard to tell when the emission was actually happening, and the timer on your PDA's map is unreliable. Rather than having AI run to the nearest shelter like they do in Call of Pripyat, most NPCs will just straight up despawn when an emission comes on unless you're looking right at them, and I think I know the reason. One time during an emission, I was tasked with getting to shelter in an area that was way off and I was already indoors. I figured that, I'm already here. It would be better to stay put rather than risk running out when I know an emission is coming on, because for all I know, I could get jumped by some mutants and not make it to the designated safe spot in time. Well, I died anyway despite being sheltered indoors. And before one of you says, well, actually, you weren't in an area that was safe from the emission because this, that, or the other, then why did the NPCs who were too close to despawn all take cover inside of this building? Also, these jerks blocked me from making my way to the designated safe spot, so that sucked too. It doesn't help things that, unlike Call of Pripyat, emissions don't spawn in new artifacts, so essentially they just make you stop and wait around for about 2 to 3 minutes without any benefit for the aftermath. Another thing that really blows but isn't necessarily a new feature is that there's a whole lot of aimless running back and forth in Clear Sky, particularly when you're doing story missions. I remember that in Shadow of Chernobyl there was a good bit of hoofing it, and then in Call of Pripyat it never felt like you were running for too long because they did a great job of putting travel hubs right in the middle of the map, so nothing was too far off and you had most major quests offered to let you fast travel back with the crew when you were done. But here in Clear Sky, I get the feeling that a lot of quests are essentially run across the map, do a thing for me, run back across the map, talk to me again, and then I'm gonna tell you to run across the map again. Just like in Shadow of Chernobyl, you'll eventually get endurance artifacts that allow you to indefinitely sprint or near indefinitely sprint across the map, but that still doesn't fix how objectives are spaced out in a way that leads to you spending more time running across the map than actually doing missions inside of the map. Also, I can't say this for certain again, but at the very least, it feels like weight scaling versus sprint time is less forgiving in Clear Sky than it was in Shadow of Chernobyl, or perhaps it just felt that way thanks to all the running back and forth you had to do, meaning that you would run out of sprint a lot more often. I got to the point where eventually I started only carrying one weapon on my person during the mid-game because it just wasn't worth the speed penalty when I was trying to farm artifacts or anything else for that matter, just going about my day. Now, let's be fair here and talk about the good stuff that's been added into Clear Sky, since you know I like to end on happy notes for these kind of things. Now, while I still believe that the bad stuff clearly outweighs all the good stuff in Clear Sky, there's still stuff that Clear Sky tries that ended up working well, and unfortunately, not all of this got carried over into Call of Pripyat, which in hindsight, now that I've played all 3 S.T.A.L.K.E.R games, I have no idea why certain things weren't carried over into Call of Pripyat because they took the time to rework all this stuff in Clear Sky, like making the emissions from Clear Sky good in Call of Pripyat. So the first thing that is a huge improvement over Shadow of Chernobyl is that not only can you repair your weapons and gear once they start getting beaten up, but you can straight up upgrade them too. All major factions have a repair guy in their base who will fix up your gear, and depending on what he has available to him, will improve certain weapons and armor. There's little USB sticks floating around that you can bring each of the repairmen that they can perform additional upgrades on certain things, and you also get a fat sack of cash for your trouble. But in the early game, pretty much all the repairmen are going to be able to get you kitted and fitted while you have low tier gear. It's the late game where you gotta pick a side, or at the very least be friendly to one. Each faction has a certain kind of weapon or armor that they can only upgrade to its fullest extent. Only them. I found this out the hard way because, as per all S.T.A.L.K.E.R games, my go-to endgame gear is the Siva suit since it's a great all-rounder. But for some reason, even though you can buy the Siva suit off the S.T.A.L.K.E.R or Freedom, it's only the stinking bandits who can upgrade the thing fully, and the bandits hate my guts. While we're on the topic of faction-specific things, earning enough clout with a faction will net you purchase discounts or bonuses to what you sell them. You even get some bonuses for doing quests, such as the one old Sid gives you in the beginning without joining a faction. And if you want to join duty, you also get a fat sack of cash as a signing bonus, plus some standardized gear, which is really helpful. Grinding rep is also really easy too, so long as you just respond to any calls for help you hear, and even easier on certain factions like the Loners because they have bases which are perpetually under attack, so you can just grind up rep real fast just by hanging out there, and also just start scavenging guns to sell so you can make some cash while you're at it. Finally, we have the artifacts. Specifically, artifacts here are the most powerful in any of the games. Well, in Shadow of Chernobyl, I could make a build where I'd be able to either run forever or another build where I'm I'm immune to radiation. In Clear Sky, I can use the same 5 artifact slots to be able to run indefinitely, be immune to radiation, have my wounds close up without bandages and negate bleeding altogether, and have regenerating health good enough to where if I was cautious enough, I could slowly fight my way through a ton of dudes without ever needing to use a med kit, and all at the same time too. I like this because we're in Shadow of Chernobyl, and especially in Call of Pripyat, selling off artifacts is easily a no-brainer since artifacts suck in Call of Pripyat. Here in Clear Sky, it's a legitimate debate if I want to sell something off or not because artifacts are really useful. Like add 20 kilos to your carry weight useful, or a plus 40 to bleed healing useful, which if you don't remember from earlier in the video is essentially just fixing the bleed in the game, and you save so much money on not having to buy like 200 bandages every time you go out. Okay, time for that cooking segment. Remember that we got that sweet patron apron, which is waiting for your name to be embroidered onto it over at the Patreon if you pledge yearly at the $5 tier. We've been doing some pretty wild stuff lately in the kitchen, so let's do something relatively simple. Fried zucchini. Yes, I know there's frying involved, but it's not that bad. First order of business is to get out the things you're gonna need, and we're also gonna get our breadcrumbs with some Italian-ish seasoning in it, which I believe you can buy at the store, but I make them myself. Some eggs for egg wash, some flour for dredge, and of course, your zucchini. Now, this recipe works for both the little coin slices of zucchini or strips, because let's be honest, it would be a little weird if it only worked one way. Slice up your zucchini whatever way you want, and then lay them out on a paper towel lined half-sheet pan. Give them a good salting, and then let them sit for 20 to 30 minutes. Once you see them sweat out their excess moisture, dab them dry, flip them over, and salt them again on the other side for another 20 to 30 minutes. We want to get as much excess moisture out of these zucchini as possible so we don't end up with a soggy end product. While you're waiting for the other side of the zucchini to dry out, go ahead and prep your breading station. 1 container for flour, 1 for some beaten eggs, which you can easily get done while the moisture is getting out of the zucchini, and 1 for your crumbs. While you're getting those crumbs ready, take a good look at your breadcrumbs. Are they a little on the coarse or chunky side? Well, then maybe run them through a food processor real quick to get them extra fine, because as I can tell you from experience and working on this recipe, it just doesn't work well when you try to double bread the zucchini, so you're gonna need some real good coverage the first time around, and good coverage comes from fine grit breadcrumb. All right, zucchini slices are good and dry. Let's do this. Fill your pot with freedom juice, making sure that there is much more room inside of it for displacement than it could ever possibly need, because it's gonna get bad if that goes over the edge. Light that fire, put in the thermometer, and start breading up the zucchini. Now, it's something that we've done before, but we can do it again. Dip the zucchini slices into the flour, making sure they're coated evenly, and then give them a little shaky shake to remove the excess flour. Then drop them into the egg mix without touching it, and use your other hand, which is now going to be the wet hand, to thoroughly coat them before filling it out, giving them a little shake to get the excess off, and dropping it into the breadcrumbs. Now go back to using your first hand, which is dry, to coat the eggy zucchini into the crumbs, with your wet hand out of the way so it doesn't get all nasty. Once it's all coated up, set it aside on a plate while the freedom juice is heating up to at least 340 degrees of freedom heat units. This should be more than enough time for you to get all your zucchini breaded and for the breading to sort of set and dry on the zucchini. Okay, oil's good and hot. Carefully lower no more than 5 zucchini at a time into the oil, taking care not to break the surface tension. This is not only to keep control of the heat, but also because you need to watch these like a hawk while they cook. These are going to take 2, maybe 3 minutes tops, because they cook fast, and you'll need to give them a little turn halfway through and then fish them out, preferably with a kitchen spider, but some heat-proof tongs will work well too. Put the now fried zucchinis onto a paper towel lined rack, give the freedom juice a little bit to come back up to temp if it needs it, and alternatively keep an eye on it to make sure it's not overheating because maybe your zucchini aren't cold enough to bring the temp down, and then repeat with all your zucchini until your batches are done. Congratulations, you can now produce the reason why I am fat. Part 3. Endgame. Welcome to the endgame. There is finally some new content. I know we had the swamp area in the beginning of the game, but now we have the red forest to explore. And another place, but it gives me pain to think about it, so we won't mention it until we have to. Out of the just under 18 hours it took me to get through Clear Sky, which is not counting the credits, a little under 5 of those hours are new content segments, which wasn't seen in a previous game, with 2 hours of that being the swamps with all the tutorials and stuff, and then an hour and a half each in the red forest, Forest, and then the Limansk Hell sequence. The Red Forest is actually pretty cool. It's a new area that's got a lot of stuff that's unlike what we've seen in previous Stalker iterations, which is usually swamps, abandoned facilities in swamps. The forest environment adds a new level of claustrophobia to the mix as you can't see through the trees that well. Before we go any further with the plot though, there is something we must do. It's farming time! You get little lump sums of cash from helping out friendly factions and then collecting rewards. Sometimes they just give you random items like this was New Vegas. But you're gonna need some serious cash if you want to gear up for the end game, and you're gonna really need some impressive artifacts strapped onto your suit if you want to survive. Now, this is a time that you're gonna need to go to every last anomaly in-game and systematically hunt for artifacts until you have literally collected all of them. Built yourself a beastly artifact stack, and then sell everything you do not absolutely need to fully upgrade your stuff and buy every last bullet available because you're gonna need them for the end game. I went to the end with nearly 1,200 rounds of 5.56x39, another 700 and change of 9x39mm rifle rounds, some 45 hydro for my sidearm, and an RPG launcher, which is essential for a certain segment that we'll get to later. Oh, and also a whole lot of throwables and rifle launch grenades. Yes, you need all of that, and there are no vendors in the endgame, and even with scavenging the dead at great risk to my own health, I was nearly out of 9mm by the final sequence, but luckily, I still had all my 5.56 because I was really leaning on my 9mm. Not that it matters for the finale, but again, we'll get to that in a sec. God help you if you already farmed and pawned off all the artifacts before doing this, because they only respawn after an in-game timer of 4 hours. But what if I told you there was an exceptionally easy way to farm for quick cash in an early game area? A way that helps you stock up on that 5.56 ammo too. A way that even lets you get a little revenge for your suffering in the early game. Yep. That's right, essentially any time in the game after you get into the zone proper, you can straight up farm the military checkpoint for high-end rifles to sell to Sidorovich and 5.6x39 ammo, which will be more than you could ever need if you just do it consistently. I discovered this entirely by accident. I was given a task by some random stalker to go get his extra special medkit, which just so happened to have been left inside of the military checkpoint for some reason. Lucky for me, it turns out that it's really easy to assault the checkpoint from inside of the zone because that magical machine gun that doesn't need anyone to operate it can't hit you from the other side of their base. Travel as lightly as possible, and if you've got them, equip some artifacts that will improve your carry weight. Now go over to the military base and get some revenge for that awful scripted segment. You'll notice that all the military guys have high-end CS90 rifles, which fetch a decent price from Sid back at the Stalker camp. Grab as many of these as you can after cleaning the place out. Unload them all so you can start hoarding that ammo, and then head over to Sidorovich and sell them for a tidy profit. Stash any of that 5.56 ammo that you don't need right now into a box to conserve your carry weight and run back to the checkpoint. Guess what? Not only are all the rifles you weren't able to pick up still there, but everyone at the checkpoint has respawned with more rifles for you to collect and sell off. You can do this indefinitely, and it is actually nearly as fast, if not faster, to do this than it is to go around the whole game farming artifacts. I checked my footage, and according to the total times in the clips I have, it takes me about 3.5 hours to run around the entire game world and collect up all the artifacts to stash or sell, but a whole round takes at least 4 hours no matter what, because you have to wait for the artifacts to reset based on a real-world timer. And while you do make a lot of money doing this, artifact hunting is a costly process after repairs and expended ammo. Farming the checkpoint, on the other hand, takes about 7 to 10 minutes each time, which is including the time it takes you to run back to Sidorovich and then accounting for running back to the military base for them to respawn. You will almost always net 3 to 5 grand from a raid on the checkpoint. Plus, so long as you're running a 5.56x39mm based weapon, you're coming out at a net negative for ammo expenditures, which means that's even less money you need for the end game because you don't need to buy more ammo. Now, in the time that it takes you to do one full circuit around the map, you can hit the military base 35 times. And based on an average of about 4 grand across all raids, here comes to a theoretical 140,000 rubles for just farming the military checkpoint for the same amount of time you could do artifact hunting. More than enough to buy and upgrade every last scrap of gear that you need for the endgame. Not to mention, if you're already taking a 5.56x39 rifle as your backup into the final areas, you're probably going to need to spend less. Realistically, I'd suggest doing the Grand Artifact Tour at least once to get what you need for the endgame, and then just farm at the checkpoint to make up the cash difference you need after you sold all the artifacts you don't need. Now, why on earth would you need to do an absurd, near old school MMORPG level of farming for a single player shooter game? Because we are doomed to experience ultimate pain! That's why! The final 4 hours of this game are designed to make you feel as much pain as possible. Exploration? No. Anomalies that are cool, unique, and possible to navigate? No. Functional hitboxes? Fuck you! No! Have some Call of Duty ass scripted segments and then go cry in the shower for a while. Let me tell you about some prominent examples of the pain in Clear Sky's late game because I need others to understand my suffering. First example of the pain is the pain hole. The bridge is a whole nother exercise in we're Call of Duty now, but we'll get to that later. For now, get in the pain hole. The pain hole is specifically a part of Anomaly in the Red Forest that you help some loners take over. It is a random hole in the center of the Anomaly with a whirligig inside of it that is effectively impossible to get out of. This goes for both you and the artifacts that will almost always just decide to fall in there, which they almost always immediately do. There is no escaping the pain hole once you enter. You might have the artifacts now, but the pain hole has you. There is no getting out. If you try to move, it pulls you closer. If you try to do anything else, the game will straight up crash. The only way to get these artifacts and survive is to exploit quick saving and quick loading to reset the artifacts' positions and grab them the moment before they fall into the pain hole. But did you think that was the only hole in this game that will make you feel pain? Then, deep in the mines, we've got the Polter Hole. This room has a high-end artifact in it that you're most likely going to need, but there is a catch. Not only is most of the areas where the artifact spawns in a highly toxic zone, but there are 3 poltergeists that will spawn in as soon as you enter the Polter Hole. Actually, no, I double-checked my footage, and 4 goddamn poltergeists will spawn into this medium-sized room with you and start yeeting everything. You know what's even better than being trapped in a room with 4 poltergeists that can 2 or even one-shot you as physics objects hit you in the right way? Their hitboxes are broken! If you remember when I streamed this, it took me an absurd amount of tries to get this room right, because as it turns out, not only are grenades really ineffective because of how the damage multiplier works in Clear Sky, but also because with how the hitboxes on poltergeists are, they are essentially ineffective against them. Eventually, I figured out through the help of the chat that you need to use iron sights and aim above where they physically are to get them. It took me a solid 20 minutes of getting my shit rocked by an inanimate object every 30 to 45 seconds to get past this room and get the artifact here. It's a Kolobok though, which gives you an absurd regen rate, so if you don't have one yet, this might actually be worth it. Just remember to shoot above where you think you should be shooting. Now let's talk about my favorite part of the pain, which is the end game. Clear Sky is the most stalker game there is, because once you start that bridge fight, it is 100% scripted Call of Duty campaign mode crap. It is no longer about carefully planning your way through each encounter and approaching the enemy as you see fit, but a linear sequence of almost literal corridor shooter segments where you'll be fighting on closed off streets or in places where there are specific and intended places for you to be, and if you don't want to do it specifically that way, it sucks to suck, bro. You can try to take out that machine gunner by lobbing grenades at him, and it might even work a few times at the cost of all of those grenades you packed, but you'll then just get sandwiched between the dudes in the building and the dudes in the road ahead, because the dudes from Clear Sky that you have to take with you in the endgame can't be bothered to help you out with anything. By the way, there's not 1, not 2, but 3 goddamned machine gunner segments in Clear Sky's endgame, and they're all within 30 minutes of each other. Oh yeah, and remember how I told you earlier on that you need to make sure that you blow 8 kilos of your carry weight on holding an RPG launcher? You need that because there's a friggin' helicopter boss fight towards the end. And if you try to do it without the RPG, you will burn through all of that ammo you stocked up, even if you were taking the time to scavenge, because the spread in Clear Sky is like microwaved margarine. And if you want to know the best part about the endgame, there are no vendors in Clear Sky once you cross the bridge, so whatever you bring in with you is what you're stuck with for literally the rest of the game. Apparently, squad leaders of the Clear Sky groups can repair stuff for you so that you're not going in with broken gear, but if you run out of something because you took a weapon type that the other guys aren't using, or run out of medkits, you are completely SOL. Also, things can go from bad to worse in the event that the squad leader goes down, but that's very unlikely as the Clear Sky squadrons don't so much as leave cover until you finish most of the fight. They didn't even bother to follow me into the construction site and then just showed up once I wiped the place. Oh yeah, and there's a story here, so before we get into the end of the endgame, let's talk about it. So since S.T.A.L.K.E.R is apparently getting in worse condition due to the deterioration of the zone, he wants to stop S.T.A.L.K.E.R from getting to the center of it because that'll likely make things worse. You do a bunch of tasks that are mostly unrelated to pursuing this goal, and then you catch up to S.T.A.L.K.E.R in the Red Forest before he blows up a tunnel and you gotta go get the Clear Sky dudes and fight on the bridge, despite the fact that they were pretty much non-existent as soon as you left the swamps. Then you push through Limansk, and exactly what you think happens in a prequel story where you're set against the main character from the previous game happens. But in the meantime, I'm just gonna come out and say it. Limansk is worse than the Chernobyl NPP in the last game. At least with the NPP, while it was a bunch of linear shooter sequences, it wasn't a bunch of scripted crap where you had to dance exactly to the game's steps if you didn't want to die. Shadow of Chernobyl also had the decency to leave supply drops in places where your stuff will most likely be worn down, which didn't require you to have money, which was a problem for me because I spent all my money making sure I had enough ammo for the Limansk fights. And then, as you finally deal with that third machine gunner and the goddamn helicopter, you're in the final segment of the MPP again. God damn it. No, not this. It was bad enough that you somehow made an endgame that was worse than Shadow of Chernobyl's ending, but you straight up had to add the worst part of the last game's ending to the end of this game too. I don't know that there's spoilers anymore. I don't even know if I'm coherent anymore. Whatever. You get to the end of Limansk and it fades out. The next thing you know, you're on one of those elevated walkways from the Shadow of Chernobyl endgame, and you're suddenly too encumbered to move because they just dropped a goddamn railgun and the fish gun into your inventory. The railgun is automatically equipped as your primary weapon because it is literally the only thing that can damage S.T.A.L.K.E.R, who is also glowing for some reason. Might want to get that checked out, bro. This is a pain to do because you basically have to run around all the portals trying to find an angle to shoot at him as he's just running around doing whatever. Or you can just say hell no to all of this and exploit reloading to get S.T.A.L.K.E.R to eventually spawn off the walkway where he'll just stare at the wall on the base of the building until you kill him. So how does it end? Well, you are now a nameless body among the many in the C Consciousness stockpile of dudes who are getting their brains reset to go after S.T.A.L.K.E.R. That's it. Roll credits. This is not only an extreme disappointment, but also the worst ending in the whole series. If I had to sum up Clear Sky, it'd be that S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Clear Sky feels like they tried to add in a bunch of stuff that maybe they initially wanted to add to Shadow of Chernobyl, but they had to cut it, or perhaps after cutting out all that stuff from Shadow of Chernobyl, they really wanted to add a ton of new things into Clear Sky, and frankly, not a lot of it works. In fact, most of it detracts from the formula they nailed down in Shadow of Chernobyl. Something else that I thought of while playing this is that while this was very frustrating to play as is, I would have been a lot more tolerant of Clear Sky if it was just an expansion pack to Shadow of Chernobyl instead of a whole new game. Most of the time you're going to be spending in Clear Sky is in areas that are essentially remixed versions of what you already played in Shadow of Chernobyl, and if this was an expansion, it'd be a really good one on par with the amount of content that, say, Firaxis usually adds to their expansions. But it's not, so I don't feel that way about the Clear Sky. I feel frustrated at it. If there's one silver lining to Clear Sky, it's that Cult of Pripyat is entirely better off thanks to Clear Sky's experimentation. They took all the bad stuff and trashed it, they took all the workable stuff and made it good for Cult of Pripyat, like emissions, repairs, and upgrades, and learned from Clear Sky's mistakes in the form of how goddamn scripted segments are not good for S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and they let the player make their own big set piece events. If you want my Stalker recommendations, I'd say start with Shadow of Chernobyl, then go to Call of Pripyat, Metro 2033, Metro Last Flight, Postal 2 Paradise Lost, and then finally, Chernobylite. Thank you all for suffering this breakdown with me. Please subscribe and hit that bell so that you can get these videos beamed directly into your pain receptors as soon as they go live. Don't forget about that Halloween in July Patreon special we've got going, where any yearly pledge gets a sweet iron-on patch, and all the yearly pledges at the $5 tier or higher get their own patron apron with their name embroidered onto it. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay indoors, wash your hands frequently, wear your sunscreen when you gotta go out, and enjoy this cat video.
What is it we have here? We got a backpack boy on the premises. Oh, you murdering my strappies? Because they got daddy smells? Okay, I need to turn autofocus off. It is backfiring. Still learning this camera, folks. Oh, and now, of course, you're not doing it. Because you see I got the camera. That's a good shot. Look at that. Ooh, I should definitely use a still of that look for a cat image. Look at this boy, just so pleased with himself. Well, that's not my finger, that's part of the chair. Because he's rubbing on my backpack after I went to the gym. Except you left it alone all day and only started rubbing up against it when Mommy came home. Is this some kind of flex? Are you flexing on us? We raised a goddamn flexor. Are we disturbing you?
If you got something to say, say it.
You guys, I am being
You got something to
cyberbullied
say. I'm
here.
listening. I'm all ears.
Did they push? Oh my god! I just had dominance asserted onto me.